Unfortunately, technical issues made the original recording at the Orkney Island Science Festival unusable, but Brian Cromarty has kindly made his own podcast available for us to present here, along with some supporting stock footage.
Hello, I'm Brian Cromarty. I'm a musician living and working in Orkney. I've made this recording to break down and explain the creative process behind my telling of the Orkney energy community story through music. It's part of the Northwords story tagging project, which is part funded by the EU Northern Periphery and Arctic programme. It's led by Robert Gordon Uni and local partners including the University of the Highlands and Islands. My brief was to bring the Orkney energy community story to life. I said that I would make field recordings to build a collection of natural and industrial sounds that characterise Orkney, and that using my musical skills I would create a showpiece inspired by and built on soundscapes gathered from renewable energy innovation projects in Orkney and its people and environment. So what I've done is I've produced 4 short pieces of music, and I'm just going to speak a bit about them here, one by one, and then let you have a listen. The first track is called The Fall of Warness. That's the area C where EMEC have their tidal machine test site just off the island of Adie. As well as the performance of the machines, they're also assessing their environmental impact, including any noise generated, so they're measuring what's going on acoustically too. I met with Anna Couto, acoustic engineer at EMEC, who explained the purpose and methodology behind their work.
So this is the DART system, so they are drifting hydrophones. So we go upstream the area, we drop the hydrophone, so the hydrophone is inside this stroke in order to reduce the flow noise contamination, so that is moving at the same speed of the water, so to avoid that kind of like contamination. There's also like the floating buoy support and then just flags just to be easy to catch. So we deploy that upstream of the box and then we let it drift, and then we pick it up once we think that has passed the sampling box, and we do that over, well, here we did that like for an entire day. What we did then was like we work like stages of the tide, so when it's going from slack to like peak flood, and then again like a slack from peak ebb.
A few days after we spoke, Anna sent me over 5.5 hours of recordings from the day of testing. Now, these recordings are part of their baseline survey, so what we're listening to here is the sea itself, and listening through it there is, as you might expect, quite a lot of quiet time where there's just nothing much but the rumble of the sea going on. So I worked my way through the recordings and put together a highlight reel of the bits where there was something more interesting happening, and that's what you're hearing play in the background just now. Although there's maybe not a lot going on for long spells throughout the recordings, the bits where there is some movement in the water, the lapping of a wave or the bubbly noises and what have you, are to me mind quite musical, so I took to listening carefully through these bits for inspiration. I grabbed the nearest instrument to me when I was listening, which happened to be the fiddle, and I started picking some notes out of the sounds I was hearing. I'm no much of a fiddler at all, but I thought the plucked sound of the strings, along with the big echoey reverb that I've stuck on them, evokes the sounds of the water pretty well, so on it stayed. The track starts with the hydrophone still on board the boat. You'll hear the splash of it being dropped overboard, then the petrol engine receding to be replaced by the natural sounds of the sea. The next track is called Gravity Base, and it's made entirely as soon as I recorded when I visited Leask Marine's workshop up at Hartston in Kirkwall. Up there they were making a big iron structure, which is going to be a base for a tidal turbine up in the Faroe Islands. As you'd expect, it's a busy place. There was a lot of banging and clattering going on, lots of vehicles and folk coming and going all the time. So to translate that into something musical, I thought something fairly upbeat and strong and percussive elements would best fit the job. The noises I found and that I've used include this metal cutter, and I've manipulated that to underpin the rhythm like a kick and snare would do on a drum kit. I've also chopped up this recording of a MIG welder and boosted the frequency to give a nice high rhythmic pulse. Another big part of the piece is the recording of the bandsaw, which I altered first to give me this bass tone, and again to play something approaching a kind of string section. Over in another shed, I found the centre section of the gravity base, a great big 6 feet iron cylinder waiting to be fitted to the main structure. It gave off some great musical chimes, many thanks to Martin Scott and his hammering skills. Playing around with that bell-like tones gave me plenty scope to add a bit of tune to the track. Listening back to this field recording, I enjoyed the overall sound of the workshop just as it happened. It's plenty interesting as a standalone field recording, so I've layered the finished track up with bits of that as well, and just having to be careful to remove or reduce anything that clashed with a beat or a musical note in the structured stuff. You should be able to pick out angle grinders and hammers. There's a pretty bit of speech maybe. Radio 1 makes an appearance, and there's a few forklifts gone past as well. So that's the gravity base, and here's the finished track. As soon as I stepped out of the car on Hammars Hill, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for this next track. All the turbines up there have got 3 blades, and when you hear them in the wind, they make a lovely, steady 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 rhythm. So it just had to be a waltz. Now, to come up with a tune that was inspired by the turbine, I looked at the letters in the phrase Hammars Hill wind turbine. I gave each one a musical note value for a grid to come up with this. That's a trick I often use for composing, just as a catalyst. Usually what I end up with doesn't sound anything like where I started. But in this case, the notes sat really nicely together. The phrases worked well. So there are big chunks of the way it came out in the first place, making it into the final tune. Sound-wise, my first idea was to manipulate that blade recording to produce all the notes and chords, like I did with the chimes in the previous track. But there's always a danger when you're manipulating bits of audio that will end up overdone or too obviously messed about with, and that's what happened with this. It does sound a bit like a carousel, and that is kind of in keeping with the round and round kind of themes. They weren't the tones I was after, and it's not strong enough to stand on its own, so what I ended up doing instead was recording the main parts with mandolin and guitar, but I kept the wind carousel sounds on there for a counter melody and chords behind it. The original recording of the blades is also working away in the background, keeping the rhythm. Here's the Hammars Hill Waltz. This fourth and final piece represents the domestic use of renewable energy. It's a big, busy track with lots going on. On the instrumental side of things, I've got drum tracks made in the computer, electric guitar, banjo and mandolin again. I wrote a riffy kind of tune to complement all the layered renewable field recordings. Those recordings are taken for our own air-to-water heating system here at the house, alongside recordings I made of one of the co-wheel scheme electric hire cars. The track opens with a car and getting into it and setting off. That includes a nice pretty jingle that plays when you turn on the ignition. And I've chopped that up and used it throughout as a series of chord stabs. I also had a contact mic which I tried on the steering column and across the dashboard, and that gave me all these other sounds which were good for manipulating into other bits of motifs in the music. From outside the car, I made stereo recordings sort of driving by, which you can particularly hear if you're listening on headphones as the car approaches for one side and then seems to pass in front of you and shoot off the other way. What you're hearing is the tyre noise and wind displacement. There's no engine noise, of course. The road surface was pretty wet when I was doing that, and without that extra dimension there probably wouldn't have been very much sound to play with at all. For the domestic heating side of things, I recorded our inverter, the bit that sucks the air in the garden. And that's what creates the bass note throughout. I recorded also on various parts of the boiler, which gave me a mid-range drone sound. And then in the house I've got radiators being scratched for a bit of percussion. And then I finish up with a contact mic on the kitchen sink while the hot tap is switched on. Because of that ending and the sheer amount of elements that's on the track, I decided to call this one Kitchen Sink. This is my last piece for the Northword project. It's been very inspiring. What I collected out and about is taking the music in totally new directions for me, and it's also really good to see so many efforts to secure a clean and sustainable future right here on our doorstep. There's many other aspects of that local industry that I just didn't get to, but maybe that could be for the future as well. The world of field recording is an entirely new thing for me, and one I'm going to continue incorporating into my music. I'm looking forward to getting out with my microphones again very soon. So to finish up with, here is the kitchen sink.